Hi, welcome to Only Human. Today we're going to talk about what everybody else in the world is talking about, and that is the United States uh, B-2 bomber mission to Iran this week. And we're going to approach it through the lens of complexity and simplicity. We're going to talk a little bit about fatigue. We're going to talk a little bit about planning, and we're going to talk a little bit about lessons learned. Uh, what's interesting about this is that I can tie directly my doctoral dissertation to this event. And let me explain that a little bit. Back in August of 1990, Saddam Hussein, the dictator from Iraq, invaded Kuwait. And he pushed across as much as he could. Eventually, he ran out of gas to fuel his army, but we did not have a very good response ready for that event. And in fact, he could have rolled right across Kuwait and into Saudi Arabia if he had the logistic support to do it. And the United States was not prepared. Well, back then, there was a brand new airplane. It was called the B-1 bomber. And we were much like the B-2 is today in that in order to load conventional weapons on that aircraft, which was originally designed to be exclusively a nuclear bomber, there was only one base that it could be done from. Back then, it was Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. Much like today, the only place you can launch B-2s out of and load them with massive ordnance penetrators is likely Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. So the question was, how can we extend our reach with the bombers that we had available? We had a lot of them. We had 100 B-1 bombers back then, or pretty close to it. And how would we sustain that over time if we had to continue to fly them back and forth, right? So those of you that followed the B-2 mission here this week know that was a one-way flight that took 15 hours and then 15 hours coming back. Probably closer to 17 coming back because of the headwinds, maybe even a little bit more. So when you look at that and you say, wow, a 34, 35-hour mission, that was really difficult from a fatigue standpoint. You need to understand that those pilots probably didn't get a lot of rest the night before, and they undoubtedly arrived 3 or 4 hours before the launch window. So we're really talking about a 40, maybe even more hours of continued alertness required to pull that mission off. As we looked at it back in 1990 and 1991, we wanted to answer that question of not only can we fly this mission safely, but could we relaunch those crews to fly more of them? And how long would it take to get them rested and rehabilitated? And so we're going to come back to that in just a minute. But let's talk about complexity and simplicity in pulling something like this off. Now, those of you that aren't aware of how military missions are planned, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are required to not only plan their own specific part of a mission like that, but then coordinate it until it comes out in an operational plan, right? And the coordination on this one is extremely complex because there was actually over 125 aircraft that were involved in this, right? Air refueling tankers, fighters, reconnaissance aircraft that were jamming to make sure that no missiles or fighters could take off. And the Pentagon briefing yesterday said not a single shot was fired at our strike package on the way in or the way out. So obviously this plan came together pretty well. My guess is it was months in the planning stage. You have to go back a few more years, even before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, to look at how this can go wrong. You can look this up on your favorite search engine, but the mission was called Desert One, and it was a hostage rescue mission that also had joint operational complexity, meaning different services working together. And that one ended in tragedy in the desert when helicopters ran into each other and timing was off, and it was a huge embarrassment. This one came off flawlessly. And the point is that we learn lessons from our failures and we move forward so that we don't make the same mistakes again. So back to 1990, 1991, when the Air Force was asking questions about, can we fly B-1s from the middle of the United States all the way to the Middle East, bring them all the way back home, and then do it again and again and again. And they had no answers at that time. So enter a small group of people from Armstrong Laboratories, a few B-1 crew members, of which I was one, and we decided we could study that using long-duration simulators. And so we created a mission that would fly from Ellsworth Air Force Base to the Middle East, drop simulated weapons, and fly all the way home. And we would measure a lot of things to find out what we could learn about the human performance inside of that great piece of technology and a fairly complex plan. So that ended up actually being, I'm going to reach over here, my doctoral dissertation. You can see maybe how thick it is, 358 pages. And it was called Accelerated Curriculum Development Under Conditions of Urgent Need, a case study. I won't go and bore you with all the details, but suffice to say, we had a few crews that volunteered. We wired them up, various parts of their body, and we flew them on this mission. We brought them home and debriefed them. We gave them 12 hours of crew rest, and we flew them again. And then we did it again. So we actually did 3 missions, and the whole project was called Futility Magellan. It had a picture of a B-1 bomber on the end of a string circling the globe. Out of those 3 missions, right, as they became more and more and more fatigued, which one do you think was the most dangerous? I'll give you a chance to think about that for a second. Excuse me. And there was a clear discriminator based on a lot of things that we measured between the 3. So which one was the most dangerous? Which one was the safest? By far, the most dangerous was the first mission. And that doesn't sound right, does it? Because, hey, they're all amped up. They're ready to go fly this. They're well rested. And so why would that be safer than subsequent missions where that chronic fatigue piles up? And the best we could tell is that the crews did not recognize how degraded their performance was in that first mission over time. So we had a lot of little tripwires built in. They'd get a change of mission. They'd get new altitudes, new entry corridors, and we were able to run them into mountains by descending them too low. We were able to vector them right into naval problems where they could be shot down. They made a lot of bad choices, and their crew coordination was not very good on that first mission. During the debrief, when they recognized all of the problems that they had, they built in safeguards. Basically, they increased their margins of safety for the extreme levels of fatigue that they knew they were going to face. And so the second mission was better, and the third mission was even better. So the question was answered. How many times can you do this safely? 0, unless you train them to deal with the hazards of extreme fatigue. So as a result of that, a whole bunch of crew members got to take long-duration simulators so they could recognize it. And also, I became one of the most hated B-1 guys in the world for requiring that, or at least recommending that to the Air Force. Well, what we learned from that study, and what we've learned from a lot of long duration missions since then, is that the human body can do incredible things. But it relies on a couple of concepts. One you've heard of them both. One is simplicity and great communication. Right? So combining 125 aircraft into a strike mission and coordinating it with our international allies is incredibly complex. But it was really important for the planners to understand it needed to be drop dead simple for the crew members. Right? All of the magic that happened in the coordination had to be simplified down to here's what you do and here's what your options are should you run into trouble. And we've thought about as many ways we could run into trouble as there is. We hope there is none, but that's your mission, right? So the planner's mission was to get the mission accomplished in the simplest possible way for the people that were actually flying the aircraft. And it sounds like they did a pretty good job of that. And we'll hear more about it in the weeks to come. There's some lessons there for all of us that run organizations and go through changes, and that is the more complex something becomes, the more planning needs to be done to make sure that during the execution phases of those changes, it's simple for the person with their hands on the controls, whether that's a line manufacturing worker, firefighter, police officer, or combat pilot. Right? That's lesson one, and that's not easy to do, right? But if you keep that in mind, you keep that top of mind, the number one thing we have to do is make sure this can be executed in a simple, positive, direct way. Handling complexity becomes a lot easier. Now let's talk about fatigue for a minute. Really interesting when people start to study fatigue, especially fatigue in aviation or healthcare or other areas, that we build in those safeguards to increase the margins of safety. And we have our people as alert as possible at that moment when they get into an area, like a target area, where things could go haywire. But there's danger not only at that moment, there's danger on the other end of the spectrum. I would argue the most dangerous part of that mission was the return flight home. When they were euphoric and they came off that euphoria into another 12 to 14 hours of mind-numbing boredom. And hopefully some of the techniques from the study that we did maybe were still in mind. One of the techniques is constant communication. If you're able to do things, and there were goofy things the crews did to overcome the boredom and the complacency. They played Trivial Pursuit, right? Every 30 minutes, one crew member was required to say, okay, it's time to do a station check. Everybody check all our systems. How are we doing? I remember there was one crew that literally knew every line to the Monty Python movies, and they would reenact them. And they were laughing. And so whatever it took to keep their minds engaged is what they did during the boredom and the routine of the return flight home. The build up to the actual mission, it was not as difficult. And there's some of you out there that are in the military that will know that it's highly likely that those pilots had go pills with them, say they were pharmacologically enhanced stimulants that they'd been pre-tested on, they knew their reaction to, they knew the right dosage for the right individuals, and they were scheduled to take them, if required, at certain specific times during the flight. Right? Kind of like us drinking a cup of coffee, 20 minutes before the webinar, so I'm alert for it. Fatigue is a fickle thing in that it affects all of us, but it affects us slightly differently. For me, the more tired I become, the more I'm short with people. I get a little snippy. I snap back at folks for no real reason. And let's think about putting that in the cockpit of a B-2 bomber 29 and a half hours into a mission. That would impact the crew resource management and the crew coordination at a critical point in time. So we need to understand what our own sort of individual symptoms of fatigue are. Now, for all of us, it's going to impact our perception and our analysis, right? Because it impacts our brains, how we see, how we analyze, and then again, how we communicate. Also impacts our decision behavior, right? Are we just looking to get this over with, right? So we can find some time to rest or whatever it is. Does it impact our ability to make sound decisions under stress? And if it does, is that a really good thing to know going in? So that when you want to make that snap decision, you say, wait a minute, let's think this through, let's get some team input and decide what that is. Now, that's what we call increasing our margins of safety for this known risk. Right? A lot of risks out there that we could also talk about, human risks, enemies armed with missiles and guns and other fighter aircraft and all that. Most of that is taken care of in the vocational training of a combat pilot. But not this other stuff, not this mind-numbing long-duration mission that's going to leave you in a physiological state you may never have been in before. So hats off to the men and women of all the armed services that collaborated to plan this and to execute it. And it'll be fascinating because nothing ever goes off flawlessly to see what lessons are learned and what the debriefs look like from this mission, because it's highly likely that we will have to do it again at some point in time. We contemplated it first all the way back in the 1990s, and 34 years later, some of the things we learned were applied. Military is really good at holding on to lessons and conducting after-action reports. But how about the rest of us? How often do we have a positive or negative outcome that we don't debrief for all that it's worth? We don't pull every lesson from the challenges we face, the successes we have, and the failures that we come up against. So as we talk about human performance, this is a pretty good case study. And I don't know whether we'd be talking about it had it not gone as well, but it's important to understand that when we get an opportunity to look at some feat like this, that it's not enough to clap our hands and say, great job, fellas. We need to analyze what it means to us and what we can learn from it. So I think the last thing I want to talk about here is a little bit of what comes next, right? It would be very easy for planners to say, we did everything right. Right? I'm not talking what comes next geopolitically here. I'm talking about what comes next from a human performance standpoint. How much of this information of how they prepared for this success and what they learned from their debrief will be shared across the military and maybe even with the rest of us. I mean, someday there'll be case studies written. There'll be lessons learned that come out. Because a lot of this is classified information, we may never see it. So we have to ask ourselves those types of questions. And we have to debrief ourselves every time we have the opportunity to do that. So that's it. Relatively short and sweet here for this episode of Only Human. Eager to hear all your comments and thoughts on the matter. And like always, just keep getting better where you are with the resources at hand. And we will see you again soon.